In 2017, Nintendo pulled off the biggest comeback in gaming history. It was the year they clawed their way out of failure and went on to release multiple games that are looked at as the best in their respective series. So today we're going to look at Nintendo in 2017 to see if this was their best year ever. From 2012 to 2016, Nintendo's home console sales weren't doing very well. People who owned a Wii U really liked it, but convincing someone to go out and get one was really hard to do.
Guys, they're giving away free Wii U's!
No one cares.
I hope you stub your toe tonight.
Okay.
In October of 2016, Nintendo published a video announcing their new console, the Nintendo Switch. And this sent me and a lot of people absolutely feral, showing off things like its hybrid nature, the detachable controllers, and the fact that you could play this wherever you wanted to go. But after this, they were silent for a long time, up until January 2017, where Nintendo had a full presentation giving out information about the upcoming console. And they were answering every question that people had. There was an official release date of March 3rd, 2017, along with the price of $300 US, details about the upcoming Nintendo Switch Online service, but most importantly, they announced a ton of games that would be coming to the console. They announced a sequel to Splatoon, a deluxe version of Mario Kart 8, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, a completely new IP titled ARMS, alongside a surprising amount of third-party support from companies like EA, Sega, and even Bethesda. But even better than all of this, there were two announcements that shattered the world. The reveal of Super Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, both slated for this year. And though it seems like a strange idea to announce all of these titles so early in the year, it was exactly what Nintendo needed to do to build up hype for their upcoming console. And doing it so early in the year was a brilliant move. The showcase revealed that Nintendo had learned what a lot of people had wanted. One of the laundry list of things that people were mad about on the Wii U was the lack of third-party support. Sure, the gamepad was cool and allowed for unique ways to play, but nobody was buying a Wii U to play anything other than Nintendo games. To be fair, nobody was really buying a Wii U anyways, but there was such a staggering lack of third-party support, Nintendo wanted to be clear that there was going to be things coming out other than just their first-party titles. But if you were just in it for the first-party titles, you were still getting so many good things. Splatoon was one of the only reasons people went out and got a Wii U. Nintendo doesn't normally invest in a lot of new IPs, but I'm glad they decided to make a new Splatoon for the console rather than just port over a deluxe version. Because who wants another version of a game that I can already play on the Wii U?
Hey, turn that off!
Now, I can't say I was surprised that Mario Kart 8 was coming to the Switch. It was the best-selling Wii U game by far, which is about as impressive as being the fastest employee at the DMV.
Suck it, Gladys!
But getting the brand new Nintendo IP ARMS also announced here was really surprising. So needless to say, after this reveal, the Switch was primed to do really well. But surprisingly, that wasn't the only presentation that Nintendo did in January. There was also a full Nintendo Direct exclusively about Fire Emblem, and the Direct had a few cool announcements. They were remaking the second Fire Emblem game for the 3DS. Just like the Legend of Zelda did, Fire Emblem was getting their own Warriors game, and a new home console Fire Emblem was in the works for the first time in far too long. And even a free-to-play Fire Emblem mobile app known as Fire Emblem Heroes, which would be releasing in just a few weeks. Now, at this time, I was not into Fire Emblem at all, but I'm sure the people who were into Fire Emblem at the time were stoked. But considering this was January, there weren't any major game releases up until the next month in February, where on February 2nd, Fire Emblem Heroes released to a collective
I can't stop spending money.
Though I didn't witness it myself, I was around to see the controversy that surrounded it firsthand. And since this was a mobile game that had a gacha system, people did not take it well. I can't really comment about it myself considering I was too busy playing Super Mario Run, so all I'll say is that this game released. But the next day, the 3DS, proving it wasn't dead yet, got a release of Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World. Now this was just the Wii U version brought over to the 3DS with a couple changes here and there. To get this to work on the 3DS at all, they had to make it look a little bit rough. But if you're looking at this from a gameplay standpoint, this was just a better version of what they had on the Wii U. There were additions to the game like being able to play as Poochie. I wouldn't say these are substantial enough to add his name to the title, but whatever works. But since Woolly World was such a fan-favorite game on the Wii U, it only made sense to bring it to the 3DS. Unless you were concerningly into Poochie, I don't think there was a reason to buy it again. But for the majority of people who didn't own a Wii U, this was a good deal. But as the month came to an end and the Switch release got closer and closer, Nintendo had one more presentation in store, this time being a Nindie showcase. And this was a surprisingly good presentation. Like they did with the Switch presentation in January, they wanted to show off that the Nintendo Switch was going to be able to play indie games. So right off the bat, they announced Steam World Dig 2, Yooka-Laylee coming to the console, and more games like Overcooked and Escapist 2 coming as well. And though this was just a Nindie's presentation, it was the perfect time to release it to show that this console was going to be more than just the Wii U 2. And after just a few more painfully long days, the Nintendo Switch finally released on March 3rd, 2017. And it was magical. Prior to this, Nintendo's strategy was to always have a handheld and home console on the market at the same time. And though the 3DS was still around and would still be for a little bit, this being a hybrid console changed gaming forever. Having the ability to play a game, then seamlessly pick the console up off of the dock and continue exactly where you left off was incredible. Unlike the Wii U, you didn't have to worry about straying too far away from the console. You could play home console games whenever and wherever you wanted. And this wasn't just for single player, because the Joy-Cons were detachable so you could play with friends wherever you go. Though I'm always going to miss the dedicated handheld consoles that we used to get, this was the perfect evolution for the series to make, and it feels like this was exactly what they wanted the Wii U to be. Though it was a little bit focused on one title, the launch lineup was pretty solid. There was Just Dance, Skylanders, Super Bomberman R, 1-2 Switch, and of course, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now these three games are fine. I don't think anybody was rushing out to buy a Switch to get them, but if you were already picking up the console and you wanted to get a new Just Dance, it was an option. To be fair, they also released it on the Wii. It's not really screaming system seller to me, but most people who bought the Switch early were in it for either Breath of the Wild or 1-2 Switch. Now this was definitely a weird game. Now this absolutely did what it set out to do, being a collection of multiplayer minigames that showed off the console's unique features. This being multiplayer only means you need to play it with friends. Though in theory you could potentially play this with one Joy-Con in each hand if you were willing to look and act like a psychopath. Now up until the release of the console, I was confused why this wasn't a pack-in title, but then I saw this and I quickly realized that charging $50 was nowhere near enough. At launch, playing this with friends was genuinely a pretty good time. And though now I have no real reason to play this, I'm glad I bought it when I did, so I got to experience it when the Switch first came out. But of course, the real system seller was Breath of the Wild. Nintendo has a good track record of releasing home console Zelda games on consoles that go on to do absolute numbers. They had been teasing Breath of the Wild for such a long time, with the initial reveal being at E3 in 2014. Originally, this was first revealed as Zelda Wii U, a name that I'm glad they didn't stick with, because you could still buy this on the Wii U, but you could also buy Star Fox Zero on there, so I wouldn't trust it. The Switch really needed a game like Breath of the Wild to be a launch title. The name Legend of Zelda on its own is guaranteed to sell a metric ton of units, but when you add on that this is the first open world adventure in the series since the original on the NES, then there was no way this wasn't going to be a resounding success. You could easily put hundreds of hours into this game and still find something new every time you play. Whether it was going to all of the shrines, collecting all of the Korok seeds, or just battling whatever's around, this was the largest and most important launch title that Nintendo has had since Mario 64. But outside of the lineup of physical games, there were more games that were only available on the eShop, with one of the most notable being Snipper Clips. This was another weird multiplayer-focused launch title that had you cutting the other player into shapes in order to achieve some goal. It's a puzzle game where you're cutting the other player in order to progress. And as a concept, it worked pretty well. Though it was digital only at launch, it would go on to get a physical release a few months later, and considering this was $20 while 1-2 Switch was $50, this was clearly a cut above.
If you make one more pun, I will cut you down to size. I mean, I will slice you. Oh? You know what? I don't need this. No, come back. I'll cut it out. I swear to God!
March 2017 signified that Nintendo was still able to do what they do best: make great consoles with great games to go alongside them. And in early April, there was a Nintendo Direct that showed off even more great games to come. Even though the Switch had just come out, there were a good amount of announcements for the 3DS. A new Pikmin game was announced under the name Hey Pikmin. We had been asking for a new Pikmin title for such a long time, but this really wasn't what we had in mind. It was a side-scroller where you play as Olimar, so outside of having Pikmin characters, it was something very new and weird. But it got announced for a July release date alongside a new amiibo, so it at least checked something off my list. A new Mii game known as Miitopia got announced, where similar to Tomodachi Life, you control a bunch of Miis. But this time there was combat and a fantasy setting, which made it at least something new. Kirby's 25th anniversary was right around the corner, so there were a few announcements and a same-day release of a game, that game being Team Kirby Clash Deluxe, which means it's okay, with the other titles being Kirby's Blowout Blast, alongside a untitled multiplayer Kirby game coming out in the holiday season. And finally, Fire Emblem Echoes got a pre-release DLC roadmap, because why release a game before announcing DLC? There were a ton of amiibo announced for Super Smash Bros. And The Legend of Zelda, but what everybody was there for were the new Switch games, which stole the show. We got more information about Mario Kart 8 coming later this month. They announced it would contain all of the DLC from the original alongside some new additions. There were new playable characters like the Inklings from Splatoon, alongside a completely revamped battle mode which made the Wii U look more and more pointless. Of course, they were going to announce Minecraft, as that game was going to be on everything you could possibly imagine, alongside a new Mario mashup pack which gave Mario characters in the game, which is a cool addition. Some Sonic titles like Sonic Forces and Sonic Mania were coming, alongside the hotly anticipated Monopoly, with the hit new feature of HD Rumble being used to simulate the feeling of dice in your hands.
Hello, I need every copy that exists. What do you mean antitrust laws?
Of course, there were a bunch more third-party announcements, but the last two games that are of note were ARMS and Splatoon 2. They showed off some of the characters, some exclusive Joy-Con, alongside how the game is going to work at all. Going into this, I was already a little skeptical because it was a gimmicky motion control game that made use of the Joy-Con. And the last time I bought one of those, I felt like I got robbed, but showing off the 1 vs 1 and 2 vs 2 game modes looked like a good amount of fun. But the game that really blew me away was Splatoon 2. Outside of having a tongue twister of a name, it looked like a solid improvement over the original. They showed off the new Salmon Run mode, which looked like a ton of fun, alongside a concrete July release date, and of course, more amiibo figure. And though there was a staggering lack of information about the upcoming 3D Mario title, overall, I think it was a pretty good direct. But at the end of the month, we got the release of what would go on to be the best-selling Switch game, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Though there were other titles that were impressive, Mario Kart 8 was the Wii U title, so to get it on the Switch so early was a great sign for what was to come. Now at the time, I remember a lot of people being upset that this released. Mario Kart 8 was already a couple of years old at this point, and though there were new characters in the new battle mode, it didn't feel like a substantially different game. That being said, it sold incredibly well. It's Mario Kart, people were buying this just so they could say they owned it. There's not a lot of spin-off titles that go on to completely eclipse what they came from, but this not only sold over double the units that every other Mario title on the console did, but almost half of the people that bought a Nintendo Switch since release own this game. And whether it was the fast-paced racing, the upgraded roster of characters, or the ease of play, there's a reason that Mario Kart 8 is one of the best-selling video games not only on the Switch, but also of all time. But because it was the middle of the year, that was the only substantial release in April, which leads us into May, which for both the 3DS and the Switch wasn't the most eventful month, though in May we did have one Nintendo Direct, this time entirely focused on ARMS.
You know, I've always been more of a leg guy. Get out!
The Direct showed off how the game was going to work. They showed off a bunch of the fighters, the different ARM weapon types that were available, and all of the abilities the characters were going to have. And though I was skeptical about how the game was going to work, this was a really good insight to what was coming. I was a little bit skeptical with the reveal of the multiplayer modes, as there wasn't a lot of single-player content it seemed. They were really trying to focus on how competitive this game was going to be, and though I get it to a point, this also seemed like it would be a better fit for a party game than it would a competitive fighting game. But surprisingly, even though this was an ARMS Direct, it ended with a surprise trailer for the single-player mode in Splatoon 2, which is a shame because I got more excited about that than anything that had to do with ARMS. And as far as releases go, there were only two that were worth noting. In the middle of the month, Minecraft released alongside Fire Emblem Echoes. Before this, you could play Minecraft on the go if you had a laptop, a smartphone, or God forbid, a PS Vita. But this was the first time that a Minecraft release for a handheld felt really good. It ran pretty well and had all of the same features that you would see on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Like most people, my relationship with Minecraft has always been play it obsessively for a few weeks and then not touch it for a year, but being able to pick this up so early on the Switch was something I genuinely enjoyed. And though Fire Emblem Echoes is a game that I purchased and then haven't touched since, it's a remake of the second Fire Emblem game, so eventually when I do play it, I'm sure I'll have a grand old time. But as May came and went, it was finally time for the best video game showcase of the year, E3. But not before a random Pokemon Direct, because why would Pokemon ever wait for E3 to announce something? But they showed off some new games coming later this year, the first of which being Pokken Tournament DX, an enhanced version of the Wii U and arcade fighting game, bringing all of that fun to the Switch. They showed off new characters like Decidueye from Pokemon Sun and Moon, alongside some more support characters and a new 3v3 mode, all wrapped up in a release date for September September of this year. Surprisingly, they unveiled a new Pokemon title, being Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. They pitched this as an expanded version of the originals, which is a weird way of saying cash grab. They were going to tell an alternate story than the original, which was confusing to a lot of people because they had just released these other games less than a year ago. And since there's usually a much larger turnaround time on deluxe versions, this was a bit of a shock. And finally, Pokemon Gold and Silver were coming to the Virtual Console, alongside compatibility with the Pokemon Bank and wireless trading. Now, it was a bit strange they did all of these Pokemon announcements a week before the E3 showcase, though it makes sense because there was going to be a lot of announcements there, but getting all of these Pokemon announcements without a new game coming to Switch was a bit of a disappointment. But I got over that disappointment very quickly, because just a few days later was E3 2017. Though people didn't know it at the time, this was going to be the second to last E3 event that we ever got. And though Nintendo was already having a fantastic year with a bunch of great announcements and the release of the Switch, they came prepared to dominate E3. There was a new trailer for Xenoblade 2 showing off the awesome world and character designs, reconfirming the game's release date in the end of 2017, more information about the multiplayer side-scrolling Kirby title. This would go on to become Kirby Star Allies, a game that a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with, but any new information on a Kirby title was enough to get me excited. We got information about the first main series Pokemon games coming to a home console. They did note that it was probably going to be a while before it released, but to get a brand new main series game to finally release on a home console was something that people had always wanted. One of the most shocking reveals came with the announcement of Metroid Prime 4. And people couldn't wait to get their hands on it because it was announced that they were in production and it was coming for the Nintendo Switch.
Man, I can't wait to play that. I hope it comes out soon. Just let me die.
They announced a new Yoshi title was in the works. There was more information about Fire Emblem Warriors. They showed off Skyrim running on the console, and even Rocket League was coming later that year. One of the more shocking announcements came with the Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle reveal. There were leaks about this prior to the official announcement, but I was convinced that that was just somebody playing a joke. But unfortunately for my long-term mental health, this was real. And it even got announced for an August release date this same year. The first of the Breath of the Wild DLCs was announced for June, showing off the Trial of the Sword, the Master Mode, and a bunch of new additional content. But what everybody had been waiting for was more information about Super Mario Odyssey. 3D Mario titles only come out every so often, but when they do, they push boundaries more than any other series that Nintendo makes. And the trailer showing off the game's gimmick of Cappy, where Mario's able to capture enemies and take control of them, was exactly what this needed to set the world on fire. Mario 64, Sunshine, and the Galaxy titles were all looked at by fans as some of the best 3D platformers of all time. And with the announcement of the October release date, getting one so early in the Switch's life was a brilliant idea. And it was a perfect way to round out their showcase for the Nintendo Switch. But surprisingly, they weren't done, because in their Nintendo Treehouse Live, they went on to announce a couple more titles that looked really interesting. The first of which being Metroid Samus Returns, being both a remake and reimagining of Metroid 2 Return of Samus. It had been a long time since we got a good 2D Metroid or a good Metroid game at all, so to show off the new control scheme that made this look like a modern rendition of the older formula was exactly what was needed to show the 3DS wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. But I think the most surprising announcement was the reveal of Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga plus Bowser's Minions. The Mario & Luigi titles were the premier handheld Mario RPGs from the Game Boy Advance to now, but the only game that wasn't easily accessible on the 3DS was Superstar Saga. So to get a remake of that made a lot of sense. And to pair that with a new side mode that focused on Bowser's Minions was an awesome idea. I was a little disappointed this was going to the 3DS instead of the Switch, but because the 3DS was still alive and well at the time, I'm not surprised. But outside of E3, there was only one new game that released that was worth any note, and that was the long-awaited release of ARMS. Now, usually when Nintendo releases a new IP, people flock to it like a moth to a flame. But I don't think ARMS performed as well as Nintendo hoped. Now, after release, it did get a good amount of free post-launch support, but the earliest impression I got from this was just underwhelming. There was not a lot here to do. There was a simple story mode, a versus mode, and online play. You could tell they were really trying to push ARMS to be a competitive fighting game, and I don't really get why. I am a big fan of competitive games, but ARMS never really felt like that kind of game to me. The main thing it lacked for me was a reason to pick up and play it after my first round. If there were unlockable characters, a challenge mode, or even a mission mode, I would have had a reason to keep coming back, and maybe then I would have thought of it as a competitive game. But shortly after release, I put this in a case, and I haven't gone back for any substantial amount of time since. But things started to pick up really quickly in July, where early that month there was a short Splatoon 2 focused direct, which showed off some pretty cool features coming to the game. They showed off the hub world of Inkopolis with all the stores and characters that you'll meet. They showed off the multiplayer modes like Turf War and ranked battles, and even the new league battles, which allowed squads to play competitively together. And finally, there was an overview of the campaign alongside some post-release content coming down the line. And this was a great way to hype up the game a couple of weeks before the release. And when it came out, this was a new Splatoon, alright. I loved the original Splatoon on the Wii U, and I think this was an improvement in pretty much every way. Up until this point, I was skeptical about how well the online would work because Nintendo doesn't have the best history with online connectivity, but surprisingly, it worked really well. The new game modes like Salmon Run were a ton of fun, and though the single-player story was a little short, I had a great time with that too. Now, similar to the original Splatoon, unless you're going back for the story, there isn't really a reason to go back and play this, but when this game was at its peak, it was a ton of fun. And it did a fantastic job cementing Splatoon's place as more than just a one-off success. And towards the end of the month, there were two 3DS games that released on the same day, being Hey Pikmin and Miitopia. To be fair, I've never played Miitopia, but it looks like a ton of fun. But Hey Pikmin, I think, is one of the most overhated Nintendo games that they have ever released. To be fair, it's not a very good Pikmin title, and it's just another 2D platformer that released on a console that had arguably too many. But to a lot of Pikmin fans, even saying this title out loud is like punching a hole directly through their chest. It's a side-scrolling platformer where you play as Olimar and control Pikmin to navigate the environment. Now, compared to all of the other Pikmin games, this felt different and strange, so I can understand why a lot of people get offended for even talking about this. And though it had a couple issues, I do think it's better than some of the similar games that released for the 3DS. August was another month that didn't really have a ton going on. For the first half of the month, there was a whole lot of nothing. But towards the end of the month, there was Gamescom, which showed off more information about some upcoming games like Mario Odyssey, Fire Emblem Warriors, and Metroid Samus Returns. And a few days after that, the only notable game that released was Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle, a game that I really want to hate but ultimately can't, though it has Rabbids, which are the Ubisoft equivalent of the Minions, something that I thought of a while ago and I have made everybody's problem since. The core gameplay here is extremely solid. This is the most unique Mario RPG that we had gotten in a very long time, both because the cast of characters was criminally insane, and because gameplay-wise, this wasn't like any of the prior Mario RPGs that we had seen. This being a tactical RPG made it feel more like XCOM and Fire Emblem than it did any other Mario title. And honestly, I was as shocked as anyone when this came out and was an absolute blast. But the month concluded with another Nindie showcase that showed off a bunch of new indies coming to the console, with a new No More Heroes game being announced, a launch date for SteamWorld Dig 2, and even a new campaign for Shovel Knight, the Shovel Knight King of Cards. And though I understand why they did these Nindie showcases to give all of these indie games a spot to shine on their own, 2 weeks later in September, there was an official Nintendo Direct that showed off a bunch of holiday titles that were going to break the internet. Of course, the star of the show was the final trailer for Mario Odyssey, getting a confirmed October 27th release date. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 got an official December 1st release date. We got a first look and an official title for Kirby Star Allies. Both ARMS and Splatoon 2 were getting updates. And of course, some final looks at games like Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga and Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon. But September officially started the blitz of releases that we get towards the end of the year, with the first game being Metroid Samus Returns. Now, I'm not the most well-versed in Metroidvanias, as I've only really played the Metroid titles, but after Other M and Federation Force came out to a collective disdain, this was exactly what the series needed to show that Metroid was far from dead. The new gameplay elements like grabbing onto ledges and being able to aim in 360 degrees made this feel so smooth. And of course, like most Metroid games, it had a world that was eerie but so much fun to explore. There is something that is so satisfying about countering an enemy and being able to blast them out of the air that made even the smallest encounter feel so satisfying. And if it wasn't for this title, I feel like a lot of people wouldn't look at Metroid the way they do now. It was the first step on a long journey to come back as a series. And I'm just glad that Nintendo didn't completely give up on them like they did with some other titles. Later in the month, Pokken Tournament released, being an upgraded version of what we had on the Wii U. Now, it is a shame that this released and then was forgotten about immediately, because this was a very cool and unique fighting game that had a lot of charm. And though there are a lot of reasons why this failed, I don't think I've met anybody who's played this who thought that this was a bad title. It was more so too little, too late. And the final notable release for this month was the Super Nintendo Classic Edition. I still need to buy this, but it looks cool. This was a mini version of the console that came preloaded with 21 classic games, and I really miss when Nintendo used to make these. I was always hoping for an N64 or a Game Boy version of this that gave all of those incredible titles a second chance to succeed, but with Nintendo shifting their focus towards Nintendo Switch Online, I can kind of understand why this went away. But when October rolled around, there were even more incredible releases. Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga and Bowser's Minions was the first game up, and for all of the people who didn't have a chance to play the original, this was a good alternative. Personally, I don't think this art style looks bad, I just prefer how it looked on the Game Boy Advance, but this was a remake of one of the best Mario RPGs ever made. It had all of the charm and humor the originals had while also having the quality of life changes that came with the later entries in the series. And though the Bowser's Minions mode was more so a weird addition than anything else, Mario RPG fans like myself were absolutely stoked. And it's just a shame that this released just a few weeks before a brand new 3D Mario game, or I think a lot more people would appreciate what this game was. Later in the month, Fire Emblem Warriors came out, one of the Fire Emblem games I've actually played. This, like Hyrule Warriors, was just Fire Emblem fan service cranked up to 11, having a bunch of characters from the series cutting down waves of enemies where I could just point at the screen and go,
Hey, it's the guy from Smash Bros.
I only ended up getting this because I wanted a new Warriors game to play, so most of the time I was just sitting there not knowing anything that was happening. And for me, that worked really well. I didn't really care about the characters, more so I just wanted to cut down 1,000 things at once. And considering that was all I wanted, I had a good time with this. But the final game that released was the flagship holiday title, of course being Super Mario Odyssey. Whenever a new 3D Mario comes out, there is almost a 100% chance that somebody that you know is calling out sick. And there was a really good reason for that because this was one of the most revolutionary games in the entire series, which says a lot when the other games in the series are Mario 64 and the Mario Galaxy titles. The new capture mechanic was the perfect addition, allowing you to take control over any enemy that crosses your path. And doing so allowed you to solve puzzles in such a satisfying way. All of the new worlds that you could explore had so much variety and charm. With there being so many moons, coins, and outfits to collect, you could easily put 100 hours into this without batting an eye. Mario Odyssey was a breath of fresh air for the entire genre of 3D platformers, not only making this one of the best Nintendo Switch games to be released, but also one of the best Mario games of all time. And the month of October ended with a surprise Nintendo Direct featuring a new Animal Crossing title, Animal Crossing Pocket Camp.
I am this close to throwing this off a bridge.
Now in 2016, Nintendo revealed a new Animal Crossing mobile game was in the works, but I don't think anyone expected it to get a full Nintendo Direct. It showed off the core concept of the game being to make your own camp. It was a new Animal Crossing, and though it was a mobile game, a lot of people seemed to genuinely enjoy it, so if you're one of those people, I'm genuinely glad. I just really do not like mobile games, and since I've never played it, I don't think it's fair for me to critique it, so I'm giving this the honorary label of it exists. But Nintendo wasn't done with presentations because just over a week later, there was a full direct about Xenoblade Chronicles 2, showing off a bunch of information that sent me from absolutely feral to needing to be institutionalized. They showed off the awesome new world with incredible environments, the new gameplay system and battle mechanics, and of course, an expansion pass before the game released.
Nintendo, I try really hard to like you, but sometimes you make that extremely difficult.
The $30 expansion pass would grant a bunch of DLC down the line, and there was even a roadmap that showed off when a lot of these things would release. Now, Xenoblade 2 is already a game you can get 100 hours out of, so I somewhat get why this was the case, but they couldn't have waited a month or two after the game released to try and take your money. A couple notable games came out with Snipper Clips getting a physical release, The Elder Scrolls Skyrim finally coming to the console, and with that, of course, came some Zelda items to really fan the flame on Breath of the Wild. And as somebody who was already a massive fan of Skyrim who owned it on every other console you could possibly imagine, of course, I had to be part of the problem and buy it on the Switch as well. It's Skyrim, Bethesda would release this on a Samsung smart fridge if they could, and though I was a little concerned about how the game would end up feeling on the console, it ended up being a solid port. Though this felt more like the PS3 and 360 versions than it did their successors, this was the first time you were easily able to take Skyrim out of the house, something that would go on to crush my productivity to a point that it would never fully recover. And the last major release for the 3DS for the year came with Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Releasing this almost exactly a year after the release of Sun and Moon was a bold idea, retelling the exact same journey that they had just told a year earlier, introducing some changes to make the gameplay feel a lot better, but make the story feel a lot worse. Now, when it comes to Pokemon Sun and Moon versus Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, I feel like it's up to your discretion which you should play. If you were in it for the story, you should play Sun and Moon, but if you're in it for the gameplay, then Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon were absolutely the better option. And though this is a very divisive region because of all of the tutorials and hand-holding that takes place, I still think this is a pretty good Pokemon game. The Alola region has a lot of charm. There are some interesting characters and Pokemon to meet on your journey, and though I think that Z moves are a hot pile of stinking trash, a lot of people seem to really like them, so I'll let you make your own decision. And though it was a really bad time to release an enhanced version of Sun and Moon, because the Switch was taking over the world, I understand why they wanted to get this out and available as soon as possible. But as the year began to come to an end and December rolled around, we were treated to the last major Switch game of the year, being Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And as a Xenoblade fan, I can't think of a better game to close out the year for me specifically. It took everything I loved about the original Xenoblade and dialed it up to 11. The combat system was deep and intricate, the world was genuinely one of the best in the entire franchise. The characters were well written and captivating, and of course, this was a game that you could put so many hours into. Now, I know there are a lot of people who would say this is the worst Xenoblade game, and though I disagree, I can understand because there were things that I didn't really love about this. The pacing could be very slow, there was a lot of fan service, and of course, if you've never played a Xenoblade title and you tried to pick this up, you are going to have a mild stroke. And though it could easily be chalked up to nostalgia, this is the one that I keep coming back to more than any other game in the series. And of course, at the end of the year, as always, we had the Game Awards. And to almost nobody's surprise, the Game of the Year was Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, I can understand for a lot of people, the Game Awards are a bit of a sham, but because of its incredible launch and how it was one of the most important parts of the Switch's success, I don't think that anyone was shocked that this game was taking home the win. And alongside its victory, the final DLC, The Champion's Ballad, released that same day, being a perfect victory lap for Nintendo to show off that they were still in the action. Nintendo's journey from suffering under the Wii U to suffering from success with the Switch was a comeback story that not a lot of people saw coming, but I am so glad that it did. Nintendo has been in the home console market since 1983. And during that time, they have released countless consoles, some of which performed really well, and others were not the greatest. And just when people thought they were going to be out of the game for good, they ended up pulling off a comeback that can only be described as a miracle. So it's no wonder why a lot of people say that 2017 was the best year that Nintendo ever had. And after looking at all they accomplished this year, it's hard to disagree.